Alright. Hello everyone. Welcome back to Who Can Cook. My name is Wesley. Today we're doing a Thai noodle dish called Pad Thai. Thai, I think, in most places in the world, as one of the more commonly found Thai noodle dishes, especially here in America. You find it in Thai takeout quite a bit. I think it's probably the most popular Thai noodle dish that you'll find out, at least here in America. It relies very heavily on the use of a sauce called tamarind paste, which is obviously, as the name implies, derived from the use of tamarind. So we're going to be running through a couple of the basics that go behind making a Thai noodle dish, or Thai noodle stir fry, which is to say some of the basics that go behind how to cook rice noodles. So we're going to be doing some fundamentals that are my favorite. If you've watched these streams before, you probably have seen me cook Thai noodle, Pad Thai a number of times before. I have done this on stream at least 3 or 4 times now. It's one of my favorite Thai noodle dishes, especially because I love making it at home. It's one of the really simple noodle dishes that you can throw together because it is mostly comprised of pantry ingredients. On top of that, though, it's just super flavorful, and honestly one of the best Pad Thais that I've had is the one that I've made myself. I have never actually come across a Thai noodle dish that comes even close to as good as the one that I made myself. And I think that has a lot to do with the fact that a lot of Pad Thais that you come across here in America are doing a lot of things to be Americanized, so they're adding a lot of sweetness that is not traditionally found in Pad Thai. So I think the version that we're going to be making today is kind of migrating away from some of that Americanized qualities, which I think works really well. So if you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about Pad Thai, but I know lots of stuff, so hopefully I can be helpful or informative, or at the very least fun to watch, or at least hopefully I can help you learn how to cook a little bit. So, as with many things that I cook, we're starting off by crushing and mincing some garlic. So anytime that we start with garlic, we want to start by crushing it, and that is because garlic contains a whole bunch of flavor in it called allicin. Allicin you could consider or think of it as like the juice of garlic. And if you don't crush your garlic and split that allicin open first, you won't really get any flavor out of it. You won't really taste anything from your garlic unless you plan on making crispy garlic. So before you use garlic in anything, you want to make sure that you give that stuff a really solid smack with the flat of your knife, and that's going to release all of that allicin, so we can derive some nice flavor from it. Next up is our ginger. So ginger I like pretty much any time that I work on wok stir fries. I like to pair garlic and ginger together, and that's because they work really well as the fundamentals of umami. So when, if you've watched these streams before, if you've watched any of the recipe videos before too, you'll know that these 2 ingredients, they pretty much make up the first 2 things that I put in almost every wok stir fry, and that's because they work as the fundamental building block behind the umami. So anytime that we're dealing with umami flavors, we start with garlic and ginger. So not necessarily because we want everything to taste like garlic and ginger, but because they work as the first 2 things that we put down before we start building out other layers of umami. So today, those other layers are going to come from things like fish sauce, tamarind paste. I might even consider like the shallot that we're using, some bits of umami coming from there as well. So all of these things that we're going to start layering down, they're going to be built on top of the very first aromatic qualities that we throw in first, which are our garlic and ginger. Unlike garlic, however, ginger does not have qualities of allicin, so we do have to give it a fine mince. So with our garlic, you may have noticed that I actually didn't even mince it, I just crushed it and then gave it a quick chop. That's because once you crush it, everything sort of just starts falling apart. With ginger, however, it is quite a bit more durable, which means that we do have to go through and do this fine mince, which I know is a little bit more labor intensive. Do I recommend any brands of wok? Yeah, totally. So lots of people ask me about wok brands. The wok that I'm using today, you can peek over and look at it. This is my wok. Oh, no, we don't have a camera on YouTube. So my wok, it's made out of carbon steel. Sorry if you're on YouTube, that camera's not on right now. It's made out of carbon steel and it is round-bottomed. I picked this wok up at a restaurant supply store here in Oakland. It's called Changco. If you live in Oakland, first of all, if you live in Oakland, you can definitely drop by Changco, which is on 7 and Broadway, something like that. But if you don't live in Oakland, you'll probably find that in most Chinatown areas, you'll probably find something very, very similar. So, RKK, how's it going? Yes. You'll probably find something very, very similar in any other Chinatown, and that's because those restaurant supply stores, what they're doing is they're supplying goods, so cookware and kitchenware, to pretty much all of the restaurants in the area. So anytime that you're in a Chinatown area, you could probably find something very, very similar. So that's where I got my wok. I don't think it even has a brand. I think it's just a piece of carbon steel that's curved into a wok. If you don't live near, or if you do live near a Chinatown, that would be my first recommendation, is to drop by one of those restaurant supply stores, and you can get super, super cheap wok. So I think mine was only like $10, something like that. If you don't live near a Chinatown and you don't happen to live near anything like an H Mart or a Ranch 99 or something like that, my next best recommendation is anything with carbon steel. So the metal composition of your wok is going to be, oops, we're on the wrong camera. The metal composition of our wok is going to be a lot more important than anything else. So I don't particularly have any brand of wok that I like to recommend. I'm also not like sponsored by anyone, so it doesn't pay off for me in any way. I just like to recommend the metals that you find with woks. So I love a good carbon steel wok like mine because it develops a nice patina, and it works really well in building nice seasoning and layers of seasoning in your wok. Kind of similar to a cast iron pan, how cast iron pans work. The next thing that I also love is a stainless steel wok, both of which I learned how to wok cook on a stainless steel wok, and it works really, really well. The only thing that I really recommend against, or really hazard against when you are wok shopping, is woks with Teflon nonstick coatings, which for some reason is like the wok that you come across a lot in like a lot of big box stores, and that's because I think it's because what they're trying to do is reproduce the like nonstick surface that comes from seasoned woks. But the problem with that is that that Teflon coating, it doesn't get quite as hot or quite hot enough in order to do a good wok stir fry. So since it won't retain enough high heat, you're not going to get a really, really good flash fry. So you end up with a lot of mushy stir fries if you're cooking on a Teflon wok. So that's the main thing that I avoid. But other than that, just go online and make a search for carbon steel woks, and anything as long as it has a carbon steel or cast iron works really great too. It's really heavy, but as long as you make sure that you pay attention to what the metal composition is, that will work really, really great. My band should play on Reddit. Yeah, totally. Right. Hello to everyone just joining. I just noticed that there's other people here. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time tuning into this stream, we're here streaming every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. PST, Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST, with new recipes that are coming out every Friday, which is over on the YouTube channel. So if you're watching over on Reddit, that would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen over here. That channel is where all of the recipes live. So pretty much everything that I cook on stream, it has a recipe that goes along with it. Those recipes all live over on YouTube. In those recipes, they usually move a little bit slower, kind of talk my way through some of the decision making that goes behind a lot of the recipes that I write, including the recipe for this pad thai that we're making today. What else? Oh yeah, there are a couple of different series that are going on over on that YouTube channel. Probably the most popular one, the one that people are really stoked about, is the series that we've been doing on Chinese American food, which has been super, super fun. And essentially what we've been doing is like taking a look at a lot of those super classic Chinese American dishes, things like Kung Pao chicken, General chicken, honey sesame chicken, stuff like that, and sort of looking at like what makes those things sort of tick, and like how to really construct those elements. So a lot of times what we'll be doing are like hacking things like Panda Express dishes, and sort of looking at what those dishes are and what are the American qualities of Chinese American food. Usually in that series, what I'll do is I'll do a second version in which I'll deconstruct it and then remove all of those American qualities and then reproduce it without all of the American qualities, and kind of see what something like that would look like if it didn't have so many American things in it. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to YouTube and check some of that stuff out. Lots of fun content popping up over on YouTube. New recipes out every Friday. So the next thing that's coming out this Friday is... What are we doing? Hot and sour soup. I think hot and sour soup. Or maybe it's tea eggs. I forget. Hot and sour soup or tea eggs. I can't remember. But new stuff out every Friday. And in addition to those recipes, that's also where the schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking on live stream lives. So if you were watching over on YouTube, which would be the laptop behind me, you would have known a couple weeks ago that I would be making this pad thai. So if you haven't yet, definitely hop over to YouTube, check some of that stuff out. We're working our way to 2,300 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit that subscriber goal, hop over, give it a subscribe. Cool. So what I just did is I just talked my way through the most laborsome part about making pad thai, which is Julian and Carrots. So if you've ever Julianed and carrot before, it's probably one of the most labor-intensive chops that I know how to do, and because it requires that you chop it in 3 different directions. So what we did was we started by chopping it into planks, and then we followed that up by chopping it into strips, which is very, very labor-intensive. But we talked our way through, so we're done. Alright, next up are some Thai chilies, and the more that I have made pad thai, the more that I have discovered that Thai chilies are really, really essential to making pad thai. So what I used to do when I make pad thai is I used to substitute it with a jalapeno. And the more that I have done this dish, the more that I've discovered that you really can't substitute Thai chili. The whole flavor and all of the spiciness and that like iconic heat that comes from pad thai, or really any Thai noodle, comes from the Thai chili. And this heat, it's very, very specifically the kind of heat that you find in Thai food. So you can definitely substitute it, but it is going to remove one of those really, really quintessential qualities of Thai food that you're losing out on. So I have definitely, that said though, I have definitely substituted this with, for sure have substituted it with a jalapeno. You could use a serrano pepper, Fresno pepper, really any kind of pepper that has like a medium to mild heat will work just fine too. But if you can get your hands on it, find yourself some Thai chilies, and this will definitely put you in the right flavor palette at the very least. So to that end, because of mainly what I'm looking to derive out of this, these chilies comes from their capsaicin, so I am not actually going to de-seed these, which is going to make this dish a little bit more spicy than you would normally find. But I think it's actually going to work really, really well. So I am going to leave all of these seeds in, and it is going to give us quite a bit of heat. But I also think that the Thai chili, its heat is where all of that quintessential flavor lives. So without that heat, you're really detracting quite a bit. And I think, in my opinion, a lot of the Americanized pad thais that you come across, at least here in America, what's happening is they're leaving out the Thai chili, and that's why it comes across as like a little bit more sweet, and like very like almost sometimes I come across pad thais that are like ketchup heavy, almost. They're like have that like sweet ketchup heavy flavor to it, and that's because it's missing some of the heat, and that heat is really, really critical. So we're leaving all of these peppers in. But if you don't like heat, definitely leave all of these peppers out. Or de-seed it. Oh, you like the watch? Yeah, totally. It's a Casio. I used to have an Apple Watch and then I traded up. All right, next up is a purple or red onion. The like real authentic pad thai, it would call for excuse me, it would call for a shallot, so a purple shallot. I am not actually going to use a purple shallot because I forgot to get one. But I found the more that I have done pad thai, the more that I have discovered that you can totally substitute out a shallot for a purple onion, and it works just fine. The main difference, so if you're not familiar with what a shallot is, it's essentially a very, very tiny onion. And because it is so much smaller, the flavor of a shallot is a lot more compact and like focused. So I find that like what you lose out on when you substitute an onion for a shallot is a lot of that like really potent and like pungent flavor of that shallot comes through a little bit more. But if you forget, like I did, and you do happen to have purple onions in the refrigerator, great substitute. Oops. So I'm just giving this a quick dice. We don't need to be super small with our dice, although we do want to make sure that we don't have any large bits of onion floating around in our sauté. Did I just rub my eyes? No, that's a terrible idea. Oh, that's the other thing that we should caution against is if you are cutting Thai chilies or really any kind of chilies at all, you definitely don't touch your eyes, but you should also probably be wearing gloves, which I am not. And the reason that I like to recommend that is because Thai chilies are obviously, like Thai chilies and really any kind of chili, especially if you plan on leaving those seeds in, is going to have a whole bunch of capsaicin. That capsaicin will get literally everywhere, and it does not come off with soap. So that means that if you forget to wear gloves, it's going to stay on your hands for probably a couple of hours. Sometimes even longer than that. So what you really should be doing is putting some gloves on so you don't get capsaicin everywhere else that you touch, including when you use the bathroom. But if you forget like me, it'll probably be fine. Just be careful. I've found that I've like sort of become a little bit immune to the capsaicin on my hands. But definitely good safety precaution is to wear gloves when you cut chilies. Let's see. Next up, I'm going to whisk up some eggs. These are going to be the last thing that we add to our sauté, or our wok fry. You'll find that the eggs, anytime that you're cooking Thai noodles, is that the eggs will come in very, very last. So it will be the last thing that we add to our wok. And what's going to happen is we're going to add it at the very, very end once everything is sort of cooked already. And this is going to go on top of our rice noodles. It's very, I'd say, like, I think of it as like the exact polar opposite of how you treat a fried rice. So in a fried rice, what we do is we add those eggs very, very early. So right after we add the rice, we add the eggs. And what we're trying to do is develop these nice curds of egg. And that creates those like nice bits of fluffy egg that sort of permeate throughout your fried rice. So let's do our sauce first. In our case today, what we're after is not actually those nice curds of egg. What we're looking for is we're trying to coat our rice noodles in egg. So very often you will see people refer to pad thai, pad see any kind of Thai noodles as like egg-coated noodles or egg-fried noodles. And that's because what we're trying to do is coat those coat those noodles in egg. And that's probably the texture of rice noodle that you're most familiar with in pad thai, pad see pad keema, drunken noodle, all those things. They all have a nice egg coating that goes across the rice noodle. So we're not looking for egg curds today. What we're looking for is egg coating, which is very different. All right. You spent 20 minutes chopping shallot. Wow, you spent 20 minutes chopping shallot. That's a long time to cut a shallot. Yeah, especially if you're caramelizing it. If you're caramelizing onions, you might as well just use onions because really what we're after is like all of that like really focused and concentrated flavor of a shallot, which means that also when you go and chop it, is probably going to have a lot more juice that comes out, which means that will like make you cry more. So that thing that makes you cry when you chop onions, it's even more compact and focused when you chop shallot. Although I do have to say is that I love using a shallot whenever I can. I think it just adds something a little bit different that you don't get when you use an onion. All right, so next up, before we do our sauce, I'm going to do our green onions first. And so green onions, I love using in a pad thai by separating them first. So what I'm going to do is we're going to have two separate garnishes today. And the first is going to be the greens of our green onions, and the second is going to be our cilantro. What we're going to do is separate these. So the first thing that I'm chopping here are just the whites of my green onions. And this is super important because we're going to be adding these with our wok stir fry. So what's happening is the white portion of your green onion is a lot more durable and can withstand heavy, high heat like a wok. So we can throw these in really, really early with our garlic and ginger, and it's going to bloom out a lot of that nice aromatic quality that comes from green onions. So we can't do that, on the other hand, with the whites of your green onion, or the greens of your green onions, because that's the leafy portion. So those greens are a lot more delicate. So you don't want to throw in the greens of your green onions in your wok stir fry because they will just pretty much just fall apart and they'll basically just disappear. So instead of using the greens in our wok stir fry, we're going to separate them and then use them as a garnish. So this is going to be the very, very last thing that we add, and we're going to use them on top. You'll notice that I'm chopping my green onions slightly different. So what I'm doing here, I'm not pushing down like I was earlier. I was chopping like this earlier. Now with our green onions, we're chopping with a back slice. So I'm pulling back on the knife here. So in the opposite direction. And what that's doing is it's chopping the green onions a little bit more gently than if you were to chop it with a downward stroke like so. Because in that downward stroke, it's starting to fracture some of the cell structures of your green onion. So when those fracture, it releases a lot of the juice and like the flavor of your green onions. And once that gets released, it does not get into your food. It ends up on your cutting board, and you leave it behind on your cutting board, which is not a good thing. We want to be eating that stuff. So we call that a back slice in cooking. So the back slice, very, very useful with your green onions because it's a lot more gentle than the other forms of chopping. So anytime that you're cutting the greens of your green onions, use that back slice. All right. Now we can start moving on to our sauce. So let's chop up this lime first. So what you'll notice is that I'm doing a whole bunch of chopping, and this is really, really important because what we want to do before we start cooking is finish all of this chopping. We don't want to have anything left to chop when we get over to the stove. And that's because wok cooking, it happens very, very fast. Wok cooking will all come together once we move over to the stove. The rest of the dish will probably come together within, like, I'd say no more than 5 minutes will be the remainder of the dish is going to come together. Which means that we won't have time to do things like chop chicken or combine the sauces or cut up carrots. Definitely not Julian and Carrots. All of those things, they're very, very they take up time. They're time consuming. So we want to knock out all of that stuff before we move over to the stove, because once the wok heat is on, we're going to have a lot of trouble trying to do anything else. We want to pay our full attention to that wok. All right. Not done chopping. Oh, lots of comments. Uncle Rush. Yeah, totally. So that's a good point. I should talk about this. So what we're using today, this is a Lee Kum Kee Pad Thai sauce. I don't like this stuff. What I like to look for is actually tamarind paste, which is a little bit different. Pad Thai sauce is essentially tamarind paste, so you could pretty much get away with using it. It is not the thing that I like to use, but for the life of me, I can't seem to find tamarind paste lately. And I honestly don't know why. I can't seem to find why. I can't seem to figure out why I can't find tamarind paste lately. But I've definitely found that Pad Thai sauce, it will work just fine. Essentially what a Pad Thai sauce is, it's tamarind paste plus a couple of the other things that we already chopped up. So I think it contains garlic, ginger, shallot, contains like some dry spices, stuff like that. It's basically a combination of pretty much everything that we just chopped up plus tamarind paste. And I think it contains some fish sauce too. I don't like doing that because I like to leave those things out and then control how much of that goes into my stir fry. But in a pinch, you could totally use Pad Thai sauce though. So this is 4 tablespoons of tamarind paste. What kind of knife set? Yeah, this is so lots of people ask about this knife. This knife is a Père Noir Nogent. It's a French chef's knife that I found at, I don't know why I'm doing fish sauce this way. It's a French chef's knife. I found it at a vintage estate sale for, I think I got it for $10, something like that. It's made of carbon steel, which is why you'll notice that it has this very interesting patina on it. So it has this like nice discoloration. It kind of looks like rust. Lots of people think that it's rust. It's actually not rust. It's the discoloration that comes from using carbon steel. So it ages very nicely. So I think it's from the 70s, something like that. I love carbon steel, pretty much anything that I can find carbon steel on. Specifically for that reason is that because it ages really nicely, so it develops this very, very nice patina over time. Sort of the same reason why I like to avoid stainless steel, because stainless steel doesn't age. Stainless steel will never show wear for as long as you have it. I have pans, stainless steel pans that are like close to 20 years old and they look almost brand new, maybe a little bit scratched, but that's about it. And I actually don't like that. I like pans that kind of age with me. So yeah, you can find tamarind paste on Amazon. I don't like buying food goods online unless I absolutely have to. I also happen to live in Chinatown, so usually I just like troll like the 30 Chinese markets that are around me. But when you're not looking for Chinese food, when you're looking for anything other than Chinese ingredients, and you're trying to find it in Chinatown, you're gonna have a lot of trouble, which is super annoying. Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah. Lots of tamarind. I'm sure you can find tamarind paste on the internet. I just like have tended away from buying food product on the internet. But that might be where I end up finding it, I think, is because I can't seem to find it anywhere else. All right, so for our sauce, that was 4 tablespoons of tamarind paste or pad thai sauce, and 6 tablespoons of fish sauce. So I like to go pretty heavy on the fish sauce here. In my personal opinion, I think that fish sauce is going to be the key to the real essential flavors of pad thais. That it comes from the fish sauce. All of that fishy umami, it lives in that fish sauce. Without the fish sauce, it's really not going to come together. The quintessential iconic color of pad thai comes from the tamarind paste, but the flavor and all of that umami, it lives in that fish sauce. So it's really, really important is that fish sauce. Chinatown, yeah, good question. Patrick Simpson, that's Chinatown here in Oakland. So other side of the country. What am I doing? Oh yeah, let's do rice noodles. All right, so next up, I'm going to do a quick soak on my rice noodles here. So what we want to do is measure out. What we're looking for is 8 ounces of rice noodle. I like to be pretty specific with how much rice noodle I use. But if you don't want to be super specific or you don't care, most packages of noodle, it's sold in 8 ounces, which means that you can just measure out half of the pack, and it will be 8 ounces. But I like to measure just because I want to be really, really specific with how much noodles that I use. All right, that ought to do it. Yeah, is it the Portugal the Man cover? Yeah. It is a Portugal Man cover. Actually, it's a Portugal the Man remix without the remixed stems. So, lots of people ask about the remixes actually. So before I started this cooking show, I used to play music for a living. That music, or that band, the music that I used to play lives over on the band's page, which is called Trace Repeat. After COVID happened, all of that, the whole band kind of just got shut down because we couldn't play music live anymore. So I started producing beats during all of the spare time that I had doing nothing during COVID. And all of those beets, they live over on the sister page to Woo Can Cook, which is called Woo Cooks Beets. And I guess I could probably link that. Let's see. That all lives over on the YouTube page under Woo Cooks Beets. And this, the remix that you're listening to just came out, I think, yesterday. There it is. Yeah, so really super fun lo-fi beats that I've been producing, which is under Woo Cooks Beats. So if you're looking for any of the music that lives or is like played under all of these streams and all of the recipe videos and stuff, that all lives over on Woo Cooks Beats. Yeah, so for what we're doing right now is blanching our rice noodles. So if you've ever cooked with rice noodles, this is going to be true for pretty much any Asian noodle. Is we want to avoid using or cooking it in the same way that you cook Italian noodles or really any kind of dried pasta. And that's because rice noodles, unlike dried pasta, is much more delicate. So we don't want to use aggressive heat like you would in a big stock pot with a rolling pot of water. And it sort of boils for 8 to 10 minutes and then you pull it out when it's al dente. That doesn't really work with Asian noodles because they're a lot more delicate. So a rice noodle does not need that really aggressive heat. What we can do instead is just add it to boiling water and then let it kind of blanch for, we'll probably let these soak agitated for maybe 3-4 minutes and then let it soak for another 2-3, maybe 5 minutes. And that will pretty much do all of our cooking for us. So with rice noodles, you really don't need to do much other than give it a little bit of water and let it rehydrate. But definitely avoid those rolling boils of water. You don't need to break out your stock pots, stuff like that. Unnecessary. Yeah, Paul, they call it vermicelli in some places. I discovered that the hard way recently. Is that in some cultures, and I haven't seemed to figure out which cultures call it rice or vermicelli, but some cultures call it vermicelli, which I guess is essentially a rice noodle. But a vermicelli, as far as I know it, is a much thinner and more delicate rice noodle. So it's like very thin, and it actually doesn't need to be cooked at all. With vermicelli, you supposedly can just throw that stuff straight into a wok, and it will cook immediately. Rice noodles are a lot more durable than vermicelli, and I learned the hard way from that is that vermicelli, it doesn't work the same way. So I came across a pack of what I thought was vermicelli, and what I thought was very interesting because it was like a thicker version of vermicelli. So I bought it and discovered that it's not vermicelli at all. It's actually just rice noodles. And that day I had uncooked rice noodles for dinner, which was not fun. All right. Oh yeah. Before I walk away with this. That's our rice noodles. You'll notice that they're pretty close to like tender. They're still pretty much raw, but we're agitating it just long enough until it is no longer in that realm of space where it might overcook. And then I'm just going to let this sit off camera for maybe 5 minutes, just long enough to rehydrate a little bit more. All right, while that's going, we're gonna start on our chicken. So today I'm going with chicken breast, which I slightly over defrosted, which is why it's slightly brown, which is not good. I love using chicken breast with pad thai because it has a little bit more fat and kind of adds, that fat content adds a nice bit of flavor to our pad thai. You can really do pad thai with any kind of protein that you want though. I've definitely done it a lot with chicken breast, which will work just fine. You can also do it with tofu. I've definitely done tofu a lot. Any kind of protein that you've got, it will work just fine. You could even leave it out and just use no protein at all, and that will work also. It won't be quite as hearty. But really, any kind of protein that you've got, it will work just fine. Today I'm going with chicken thigh though because I have it, because it's defrosted, and because the extra fat I think is going to add a nice contribution to our Thai dish, our Thai noodle dish. In the original recipe, I believe I used tofu though. Yeah, it's way thinner. Yeah, totally, Paul. It's way thinner. And I felt so misled after I went home with it and tried to cook it and discovered that it's way more durable. Whatever I was cooking, it was not vermicelli, for sure. All Alright, so you'll notice that part of my chicken is pretty much cooked already, and that's because I over defrosted it. So go ahead and ignore the fact that my chicken is looking slightly cooked already. That's what happens when you don't pay attention to the defrost setting of your microwave. What we're going for, though, despite the fact that it's slightly overcooked already, are nice thin strips of chicken here. So what we're looking for are nice long strips of chicken, something like this. And that's the kind of bite that we're looking for with our pad thai. It's going to match up very nicely with the nice long bits of noodle that we have going, as well as the nice long bits of carrot that we've worked together. So I've started saying this at pretty much every stream now, but the way that we chop things when we cook stuff is just as important, if not more important, than the way that we cook things. And that's because the way that you chop it directly correlates to how that it cooks. So if you chop something that's too large, it will likely either undercook or cause everything else to overcook. So we want to pay very, very particular attention to literally everything that we chop. We want to make sure that it is chopped in the correct fashion. So if you come across a recipe and it doesn't tell you how to chop something, it's probably not a very good recipe. All right. I think that is it for chopping. Of course, the stove is not turning on. Thanks. All right, so while I finish cleaning this up, over on the stove, I have started to preheat my wok. So here's my wok. Hopefully this camera turned on. It did, yeah. So over on the stove, my wok is preheating. We want this wok to be ripping hot before we start cooking on it. This is going to be true pretty much any time that you use a wok. As that wok, it needs to be really, really hot before you start cooking on it. Otherwise, things will stick to it. So super, super important anytime that you cook in a wok. Let it heat up before you start cooking in it. So. And that's going to help us avoid a couple of things. The first thing that it's going to avoid is it's going to avoid stuff from sticking to it. So in order to make sure that we develop a nice non-stick surface, the wok has to be hot before we add the oil to it. And the other thing that we want to pay attention to is that in order to make sure that we don't develop mushy stir fries, is we have to have lots of extremely high heat. So in order to make sure that that happens, we want it to be ripping hot before we start cooking. Yeah, Paul, totally. Ricing was more useful. So actually, before we do that, let's crush up our peanuts. So the last two things that I'm going to crush up before we move over to the stove, actually while the stove is heating up, I'm going to do a couple more garnishes here. So this is maybe a quarter cup, a little less than that, of peanuts. So we're going to crush up these peanuts. What I have started doing, and I think this is a really awesome thing that everyone should be doing with their pad thais, is I've started using honey roasted peanuts, and I think they add a nice little bit of sugar that kind of adds nicely to pretty much every stir fry that I use it in. I originally bought it just as like a snack because honey roasted peanuts are really tasty. But I discovered the more that I use them that they have a nice, interesting quality to it that helps the peanuts sort of stand independently from the rest of the dish. And I love using it in pretty much any stir fry that calls for peanuts. So I use it in pad thais. I use it in fried rices sometimes. I used it yesterday in a biryani. I also have used it in kung pao chicken before when I ran out of cashews. All of those things, they work really, really great for honey roasted peanuts. Abe, yeah, have I made pad see ew? Yeah, I have actually made pad see ew a number of times. The recipe for that, it lives over on the YouTube channel. And I think the last time that I made pad see ew might have been like last week even. Last week or the week before. So. Which reminds me, I should keep introducing. If you're interested in finding out what I'm supposed to be cooking next, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel. Abe, you're actually already there. And there's a whole schedule of everything that I'm supposed to be cooking next. I very frequently will forget what I'm supposed to be cooking next. I'm pretty sure that we cooked pad see ew. I think that was last week or maybe like the week before. So probably the next time we'll do pad see ew, maybe pretty soon. Maybe I'll just add it to the schedule because you asked about it. Definitely the last time I made it, I screwed it up because I bought the wrong kind of chow fun. And the chow fun did a weird thing and it kind of like gumped up at the very, very end. But if you're looking for the schedule of what I'm going to be cooking next, definitely hop over to YouTube if you're watching on Reddit. That would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen. Lots of fun content over there, including the entire schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking for the next 2.5 weeks or so. Lots of fun stuff hanging out over there. I just added an unscheduled stream coming up this Friday for Chinese New Year. I'm super stoked to cook something for Chinese New Year because normally I spend Chinese New Year with my family, but we are all quarantining independently, so I can't cook stuff for Chinese New Year this year. If you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to YouTube, check some of that stuff out. In addition to the schedule of everything that's coming up, that's also where all of the things that I'm going, all of the recipes for everything that I cook live. So pretty much every live stream that I do has a recipe video that goes along with it. Those recipe videos, they all live over on YouTube. The pad see ew recipe was a part of a longer series that I've been doing that's dedicated to just reproducing foods from the Bay Area or restaurants from the San Francisco Bay Area. So that pad see ew came from a recipe that you can, or a pad see ew that you can find at a restaurant here in Oakland called Ni Cha Thai. The Ni Cha Thai version of pad see ew is very Americanized, mainly in the use of, it uses American broccoli instead of gailan, which I personally love because I really don't like gailan. I kind of grew up eating gailan a lot and it's like, to me, is really gross and bitter. That version of the pad see ew and that recipe all lives over on YouTube. In addition to that, there's a whole bunch of other different series going on. There's a whole different series that's dedicated to reproducing foods from TV and film. There's another series where we reproduce just Chinese American foods. So we have been doing a whole bunch of Panda Express and PF Chang's recipes coming that have been done. That series is super, super fun because basically what we do is deconstruct Chinese American food and then sort of figure out what are the American elements of Chinese American food and like identify what those elements are and then see what it would look like if we were to remove some of those American elements and replace them with Chinese elements instead. So very, very interesting approaching Chinese American food through the lens of Chinese food or like traditional Chinese food. Because in a lot of the cases with things like General Tso's chicken, honey sesame chicken, stuff like that, those things are not Chinese at all. They're basically just American food. So super interesting to kind of take a look at what like some of those really iconic Chinese American dishes look like if they weren't American. So if you're interested in stuff like that, definitely hop over to the YouTube channel if you haven't already and check some of that stuff out. We're working our way to 2,300 subscribers by the end of February, so if you want to help us hit that goal, definitely hop over and check some of that stuff out. All right, meanwhile, over on my wok, this is nice and hot. You'll know that it's hot when it starts smoking the way that it's smoking. That smoke is an indicator that we have a lot of nice heat in our wok. And what I'm doing is I'm starting with a little bit of peanut oil here to start. That's maybe 2-3 tablespoons of peanut oil. We want to go pretty light on our oil in this case because we're not actually going to start cooking everything all at once. And that's what we're doing in Chinese cooking is called a long yao, which is essentially adding that cold room temperature oil to a very, very hot wok and giving it a swirl and coating the wok in that oil. And what that does is it creates a nice non-stick surface. Without the long yao, you'll end up with a very, very sticky wok. So super, super important. Before you start cooking on anything that's made of carbon steel, you want to make sure that you preheat the wok first and then add the oil. Don't add the oil and then preheat the wok because you'll have a very sticky surface to cook on. All right, so I'm starting off by adding my aromatic elements first. So this is my garlic, then my ginger, and then the whites of my green onions. We're going in 3 at a time. We're going to give that a toss just long enough until it becomes fragrant. So use your nose at this point. When you start smelling garlic, ginger, and green onions, you know you're there. Usually for me that's about 10 to 15 seconds, but definitely use your nose at this point. And pay attention, what does it smell like? When you start smelling garlic and ginger, you know you're at the right place. Alright, so what we're going to do next, and this is probably one of the trickier parts of my favorite part about this particular version of pad thai is we're going to remove everything that we just sauteed. And then we're going to add it to our sauce. So this is super important. What's happening is that when we add these ingredients back to our sauce, it's going to infuse all of those aromatic qualities into our sauce. So we end up with a nice pad thai sauce that's infused with garlic, ginger, and onion. So I'm going to give this a stir. And this is also the reason why we didn't use very much oil in the very, very beginning, is because we don't want to infuse a whole bunch of oil into our sauce here. We're really just after those aromatic qualities and really just letting this sort of infuse into our sauce here. Any idea how hot my wok is, or any fear of the wok getting too hot? Not really. The main thing that I worry about is like spreading too much oil into my apartment, or excuse me, not oil, spreading too much smoke into the apartment, because it does smoke quite a bit. But there's really no chance that the wok is going to get too hot. Most of the places that you see like restaurants cooking, or even like street food cooking, those wok burners get much hotter than any home burner will be able to do. So we really want as much heat as possible. So anytime that I wok cook, you'll notice that my burner, can you see it? Yeah, you'll notice that the burner is cranked all the way up. So it's about as hot as that burner is going to get. And then even after we have that wok burner all the way up, we want to let that preheat for quite a while before we're ready to go. Because we want as much heat to go on as possible, because every time that we add something to the wok heat is going to start dropping. So with every ingredient, the temperature is going to drop a little bit more, which is why we use a process called batch cooking, which is exactly what we just did. As we cook some stuff and then we remove it from the wok and then cook the next thing. And what that allows us to do is make sure that every time that we cook something new in the wok, it's cooked on very high heat. That's super important. Because otherwise you would lose heat every time that you add something to the wok. And low heat is like the #1 enemy of wok cooking. So if you've ever had like a mushy stir fry, or like a stir fry that's sort of like has a porridgey or oatmeal quality to it, that comes from a wok that is not quite hot enough. So our main goal with wok cooking on a home range is to retain as much heat as you possibly can. Alright, so before we move on though, I am straining my rice noodles here, and again, what we're doing is removing as much liquid from these rice noodles as possible, for the same reason that I just mentioned, is that we're trying to retain as much heat in our wok as possible. In order to do that, we want to reduce the amount of moisture that goes into the wok as much as we possibly can. So any unnecessary moisture that doesn't need to go into the wok, we want to shake that out. So we're giving this a really good shake, making sure that we get as much moisture out as we can, so that when we add these rice noodles, we're not adding unnecessary moisture. So like what that reminds me of a lot is like the exact opposite of how you approach, say like a bolognese or a carbonara or any kind of Italian cooking. And in those Italian dishes, what we're doing is we're adding the noodles to the sauce and letting some of that pasta water carry over into the sauce. So that's really useful. And you even sometimes will just add extra pasta sauce or pasta water to the sauce, because that water, it contains a whole bunch of starch that's really important to developing a nice thick pasta sauce. In Chinese cooking, we actually don't do that at all. We don't need to save any of that pasta water, because we're not trying to build thickness from that pasta water. So it's the exact opposite. We want to shake off as much of this water as possible before we move on to the wok. Otherwise, we're going to end up with a mushy stir fry. That explains why your stir fry is mushy. Yeah, Toaster Ninja. Yeah, that's exact. I ran into the same problem for many years before I sort of cracked that. Is that like wok cooking? It's all about making sure that your wok is absolutely hot, as hot as you possibly can get it. It's also, I think, the same reason why I was cooking on a non-stick wok for a super long time, and could not for the life of me figure out why that wok was not retaining heat. And I discovered that's because it's made of non-stick Teflon, and non-stick Teflon does not get hot. So if you're cooking in a wok and it has one of those Teflon non-stick coatings, you're in trouble. All right, back over to our wok. We're ready to start cooking the remainder of our ingredients, which means that we're adding a lot more oil this time. So we're going with, this is going to be maybe 5, almost 6 tablespoons of oil or so. We're going to give this a nice, good long yao. And then we're starting with our chicken first. So we're giving this a toss on the highest possible heat that we can get. And this is going to flash cook our chicken, so we're going to get that nice wok seared chicken that comes from cooking in a wok, cooking meat in a wok. That's kind of like the quintessential flavor that you get from wok cooking. And what we're going to do, here's my sauce, is start adding our sauce in increments. So this is really important because it will build these nice layers of flavor to our pad thai. So I'm adding, this is 3 tablespoons of our sauce. And then I'm giving this a toss. And that's going to give our chicken a very nice independent flavor. So our chicken will have flavor on itself, on its own, rather than just like a pad thai that has one uniform flavor. Next up, I'm adding my onion or shallot. Alright, so very useful thing to notice. If you're wok cooking and you notice, so I think you can probably hear this, but the sizzling in my wok suddenly disappeared, and what that's a sign of is that your wok is shedding heat, so we're paying attention. When you hear that happen in your wok, stop what you're doing and just let it sit for a little bit. Give it maybe 20-30 seconds to reheat and build up a little bit more heat before you start wok cooking again, or cooking in that wok again. Because we want to make sure that we don't start shedding too much heat in our wok, otherwise we're going to end up with a mushy stir fry. So I'm going to let this sit for maybe another 10 seconds. And that what I'm looking for is I'm using my ears at this point and listen when your wok starts sizzling a little bit more and you see a little bit more heat coming off. That's how you know you're ready to move on. But if you do notice that, it's not a big deal. Just stop moving the wok and some of that heat will return. Next up, I'm adding my carrots. And then I'm giving this all a toss. And then we're going to do the same thing. I'm adding a little bit more of my sauce, so another 3 tablespoons of sauce here. I'm giving all of this a toss again, and then we're going to let some more heat return. I'm adding my Thai chilies. I meant to add these a little bit earlier, but it will still be okay. Alright, so I'm going to give that maybe another minute to let a little bit more heat return to our wok before I add our rice noodles. And that will be the very last thing that we add to the wok. Alright. That's good. Alright, so I'm adding my rice noodles in. And you will notice, we can even shut the overhead fan off at this point, is that as soon as I add those rice noodles, all of the heat is going to start disappearing. So there's going to be no more sizzling happening anymore, which is, if you're paying attention, a sign that all of the heat has just left your wok. So if that happens at any point before you add the rice noodles, that's a big problem because you're not cooking on high heat anymore. You're cooking on low heat. So in our case right now, that's okay. because we have finished cooking all of the main elements. So everything that is going into this stir fry has already finished cooking. But if you notice that happen and you still have other things to cook, that's a big problem. You want to probably pull some stuff out of the wok. Right, so I'm adding the rest of my sauce here next. And then finally, I'm adding our egg mixture. So as I mentioned earlier, we're adding this at the very, very end, and what that's going to do is coat our eggs, or coat our noodles in that egg. And that's how we end up with those nice rice noodles coated in egg. Super, super iconic and like quintessential quality to Thai noodles. It comes from rice noodles that are coated in egg. Right, so you could probably, I'm pretty sure you'll be able to hear this. You'll notice is that our wok is not sizzling anymore. I didn't turn off the heat at all. That's just what the wok sounds like, and that's because I just threw a whole bunch of stuff into the wok. So if we were paying attention and we were cooking, and this was happening a little bit earlier, and I was still trying to cook something, so if I was still trying to cook the carrots or something like that, that would be a big problem because we would probably be cooking on no heat. In our case, that's just fine because we're pretty much done cooking. All right, let's plate this up. Where are my tongs? So I'm pulling this out a little bit before the eggs are done. This is really important because those eggs are going to carry over cook quite a bit. So they'll finish cooking once we pull them off heat. Eggs cook in very, very delicate heat, so we don't need them to be finished cooking before we pull off heat. We can absolutely pull them off beforehand because they'll finish cooking in the bowl. I'm finishing with a couple of garnishes today, so I'm starting off with our green onions. So the greens of our green onions first, followed by a pinch of peanuts, honey sesame peanuts. Yeah, so crushed peanuts that we're adding right now. There are no bean sprouts because I forgot to pick up bean sprouts today. Although I do agree, Delicious, that is an absolutely quintessential part of Pad Thai. I have honestly stopped buying a lot of bean sprouts because they go bad so quickly. I don't know if you've ever cooked with bean sprouts, but they go bad within like a week, maybe even less than a week. So it's super, super frustrating. And when they go bad, they really go bad. You can't like cook a slightly expired bean sprouts the same way that you cook like, like broccoli that's starting to go. You could probably cook because it will mold a little bit on the edges, and then you can just sort of chop the moldy parts off. Bean sprouts, you can't even use slightly gone bean sprouts because what they start doing is they start shedding water, and then you'll have bean sprouts that are sitting in like a bunch of water, and it turns into like kind of like a bean sprout porridge. It's really gross. So you can't even use bean sprouts that are slightly gone. So I swear I have picked up bean sprouts and they've gone within like 2 days before. So I have like stopped buying bean sprouts ahead of time. Unless I absolutely know that I'm going to use those bean sprouts, I don't even buy them anymore. Although I do agree that in a Pad Thai, bean sprouts are one of the like essential iconic ingredients. Yeah, you can't. Yeah, you can't use them after like 3 days or so. It's super, super frustrating. All right, so the very last thing that we want to do, I know it's super frustrating because there's food to eat in front of you, but the very last thing that we want to do anytime that we cook in a wok, I've started saying this at the end of pretty much every stream now, is that we want to empty the wok out and clean it. So super, super important. You'll notice that while your wok is still hot, we have this very nice non-stick surface going on. So as soon as I move this stuff, you'll notice that pretty much it's just everything is coming right out of my wok right now. And that's because we have this really great non-stick surface going on. So what I'm going to do is I'm removing everything from the wok. And then I'm going to give it a rinse. I don't have this camera over the sink, but I'm going to give the wok a rinse. And that's going to just really just coat, or remove everything that's not stuck to the wok already. Sometimes you'll find a little bit of stubborn stuff, especially with egg, is that egg can sometimes stick a little bit. What I like to use is the wooden spoon that I cook with, or sometimes the wooden spatula, and that like delicate wooden instrument will remove all of that stuff. But the goal here is that we want to avoid doing any kind of aggressive scrubbing in our wok, because if you are scrubbing too aggressively, that's going to scrub off the seasoning of your wok, which is not a good thing. So in any kind of wok cooking, the goal is to avoid scrubbing as much as you possibly can. It's not the end of the world if you have to scrub. I have definitely scrubbed the wok before. I've used things like sponges, and even I think I've even used steel wool in my wok before. It's not the end of the world, but you want to try and avoid doing that if you possibly can, because what you'll eventually do is start scrubbing off the seasoning of your wok, which has absolutely happened to me in this wok before. So I gave it a rinse, and then I'm just wiping it down with a paper towel, and we're wiping out all of the remaining debris. And then I'm putting it back on heat. And then I'm adding a tiny little bit of vegetable peanut oil here. And then just like the same thing that we do with a cast iron pan, we're going to give that a little bit of a coat in oil. And we're coating even the bottom. Make sure that you coat the bottom of your woks too. And that's going to ensure that your wok doesn't rust. So, and that's it. Super, super important wok care. Anytime that you finish cooking in that wok, make sure that you clean it before you start eating. Otherwise, you're going to have stuff stuck to that wok, and it is going to be a real bummer, because you're going to have to start doing stuff that you don't want to be doing in a wok, like scrubbing the wok. You're going to have to get sponges out, Brillo pads, steel wool. All of those are things that you can use in a wok, but you probably don't want to be doing it, because eventually you're going to start scrubbing the seasoning off of the wok, which is never a good thing. But I think that is it. So we're finishing, I think I mentioned this earlier, but I'm finishing this with this is crushed honey roasted peanuts, the greens of the green onions, and some torn cilantro. If you don't have all of those garnishes, you could probably leave some of those out. I personally think that those crushed peanuts are probably the most important garnish. And then something green will probably be useful too. But I frequently left the cilantro garnish out. I actually made a cilantro chutney yesterday, so it's leftover cilantro. Yeah, put it back on heat and then wipe it down with some oil. Yeah, exactly, Paul. So yeah, definitely put it back on heat and wipe it down with a little bit of oil, and that's going to give it a nice protective coating of oil to make sure that it doesn't start rusting while it sits. But if you I have definitely done this before, where I've left stuff in the wok and then I went and sat down and ate. And then came back like 45 minutes later, and the wok has cooled down at that point, and then everything is now stuck to the wok. So you have like eggs and chicken and fat and oil, garlic, everything that was in the wok, and will now stick to the wok. And then it's a real pain in the butt to try and clean off. Even if you do manage to get it cleaned off, it's a real difficult to get it off. So it's super, super annoying. So do yourself a favor, clean your woks and your cast irons while they're still hot. Otherwise, you're going to have some trouble. Cool. Thank you everyone for tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. If this is your first time catching these streams, we're here streaming every Tuesday and Thursday at 6:30 p.m. PST and Wednesdays at 6 p.m. PST. with new recipes that are out every Friday over on the YouTube channel. So if you're watching on Reddit, the YouTube channel, that would be the channel at the bottom of the screen. That's where all of the schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking over the next couple of weeks live. So if you were watching over on YouTube, you would have known a couple weeks ago that I would be cooking this pad thai. I know lots of people have been watching over on YouTube already, so definitely you can hop over and join the chat. Toaster Ninja, yeah, thanks for tuning in. Have a good one too. So definitely, if you haven't hopped over to the YouTube channel yet, hop over and check some of that stuff out. Lots of fun stuff coming up over there. You'll definitely find the a schedule of everything that I'm going to be cooking next. I forget what I'm cooking next. Yeah, I honestly don't. I think we're making General Tso's chicken tomorrow. I might be wrong about that. I can't remember. But if you were over on YouTube, you would have known probably before even I knew that what we're making, because there's a whole schedule of pretty much the next two and a half weeks or so of what we're going to be cooking next. I know I just added a Chinese New Year stream into the schedule for this Friday, which is off schedule. I'm super stoked to do that because I love cooking stuff for Chinese New Year. So if you haven't yet, definitely hop over to YouTube, check some of that stuff out. In addition to the schedule of streams, that's also where all of the recipe videos live for everything that I cook. Pretty much everything that I cook, it has a recipe that goes along with it. Essentially what we're doing on these live streams are cooking through everything that I publish. So we're cooking through all of the recipes that I've been publishing over on YouTube. So I know lots of folks follow these streams. They're following over from gift recipes. So a lot of the recipes that I'm publishing have been published at some point over on gift recipes. There's definitely longer forms of those recipes. They live over on YouTube. In those recipe videos, I'll usually talk a little bit slower. We'll take a little bit more time to kind of talk through some of the decision making that goes behind those recipes, why I add certain things, why I leave some stuff out, and like why I make some of the decisions that I make in a lot of those recipes. So yeah, General Tso's chicken, that's going to be super fun. Actually, the General Tso's chicken, that brings me to my next point, is part of a larger series that we've been doing, reproducing Chinese American food. So that's part of a whole series that I did just dedicated to Panda Express hacks. And essentially what I've been doing is hacking Panda Express dishes that kind of represent to me a lot of those iconic Chinese American dishes, and then figuring out what are the American qualities of Chinese American food, and then seeing what it looks like if we remove all of those American qualities. So really often when I hack Chinese American food, you'll find that I'm removing a lot of sugar, because that's, to me, is like what makes Chinese American food so American, is all of those sugar qualities. And what I'll usually do in those recipes is I'll do a second version that I call like the Wukan cook version. Essentially what we're doing is replacing a lot of those sugars with other elements that come from traditional Chinese cooking. So I think the General Tso's chicken that we did removes a whole bunch of brown sugar and I think a little bit of honey, and then it replaces it with spicy black bean paste, I think fish sauce and oyster sauce. I think those are the three things. I think there's some hoisin sauce going in there too. And essentially what we're doing is seeing, like, reimagining what Chinese American food looks like if it wasn't American, if it was just Chinese. So that's like that's probably my favorite series on the channel, is doing the Chinese American foods, because it's really interesting. To me, Chinese American food is not Chinese at all. It's just American food, and sort of like taking a look at because like fried chicken, like fried popcorn chicken, that's definitely not a Chinese thing. So kind of like taking a look at like something that is basically like Southern fried chicken essentially, and like how did that food kind of end up in Chinese culture, and like what happened to Chinese food when it came to America, and like what were like people who brought that stuff over, what were they doing in order to make it so that Americans would eat it. So there's a whole series dedicated to that. There's another series that's dedicated to just reproducing foods from TV, which is super fun, because it's basically a lot of like creative imagination, because a lot of the time the things that I'm reproducing are just animated food. There's another series that's dedicated to just reproducing food from the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area restaurant scene, which is super fun. Lots of stuff like that popping up over on the YouTube channel. So if you haven't hopped over to YouTube yet, definitely check some of that stuff out. Lots of fun stuff living over on that channel. And that's all over on youtube.com/WooCanCook. If you're watching on YouTube, you're already there. If you're watching on Reddit, that would be the YouTube channel at the bottom of the screen, and is the stream that's happening behind me. Where can you catch the General Tso's chicken? Yeah, that one will be, I forget when. I'm pretty sure that it's happening tomorrow, either tomorrow or Thursday. and that's going to be over on YouTube. So that's the YouTube channel that I just mentioned. So youtube.com/woocancook. And if you don't catch the stream, or if you miss the stream, there's also a recipe video that lives over on YouTube too. So you can definitely catch the recipe video. And cook. Let me see if I can find that recipe video. There it is. I found it. Oh yeah, please follow and hit the bell. Yeah, I totally forget to tell people to hit the bell, but definitely hit the bell and do internet stuff. I don't know. I don't really know how the internet works anymore. It's confusing. You would think that subscribing does that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. You rock too. Thank you everyone for tuning in. It's always super exciting to see so many people like tuning in over and over again. So I know I recognize a lot of people from these streams, especially folks in the YouTube stream and chat too. I definitely see Delicious and Paul, Toaster Ninja, and all of you folks. I see lots of folks that I recognize. So always super fun to see people coming back. I know I've seen RKK before too. So always super fun to see people tuning in over and over again. I'm always super grateful to see so many people watching and tuning in. Really excited to keep making food for you all, and definitely keep tuning in. Stick around. If you have any questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. I'll be around cleaning up and doing dishes. So I'm going to turn the mic packs off, but I'll be able to answer in the chat too. So if you have any questions that I missed, and if you asked any questions and I missed them, feel free to repeat them. I know I miss stuff all the time. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. I'll see you soon.
so I could